Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. In today's episode on the 2024 BMW R1300GS, we are going to do what you have all been asking for. We are going to take this on a ride both on the highway and off-road, and we're not going to hold back. We're also going to take a look at some of the cool, exciting new features that the 1300GS has and talk about what they mean for you as a rider. Throughout this episode, we'll be talking about how this bike compares to its main competitors out there, but also how it stacks up against the outgoing 1200 and 1250 GS. So let's fire up the engines and get this episode started. All right, let's do this. Things you might notice right away on the new GS compared to the old one: has a different starter sound, and the engine has a bit of a different sound, a bit more refined, a bit less vibration like side to side, but it still sounds like a Boxer. I'm gonna run with my windshield up like this most of the way because I know it kind of gets in the camera view, but it makes for a much better audio. And we'll talk about the wind protection. So what are the first things I notice as, a previous GS owner and I'm riding this? Well, the bike it still feels like the same GS that I've always loved. The ergonomics feel the same, the comfort feels the same, the riding position feels the same. So I don't know why some people have been saying that it's not as comfortable. That's completely untrue in my opinion. It has basically the same ergonomics. There's a couple things. The engine is more refined, it's more powerful, it has more torque. The other huge improvement that I immediately noticed when riding this is the transmission and the quick shifter are tremendous improvements from the previous 1250. So the bike clicks through the gears with the quick shifter really nicely. It's not the best quick shifter in the world, but it's very good. It's very good. It's no longer really clunky like the previous one used to be. So the overall experience of changing gears, whether with a quick shifter or even without it, is a massive improvement. So I really appreciate that. The other thing I noticed right away, frankly, is that the range of adjustment of this electric windshield, let me put it down. So you hear that wind kind of on my helmet. So with the windshield down, I have a lot of wind on my helmet, not buffeting, but I get a nice airflow if that's something I need, if it's hot, if I just want airflow to my helmet. Now if I put the windshield, and you can stop, it's infinitely adjustable, you can stop anywhere. That's about halfway up, and you notice how it got pretty quiet. Feel just a little bit of wind kind of on the peak of my Cryos Pro. If I put it all the way up, pretty much the wind disappears. I don't feel any wind on my helmet at all, and my face shield's actually fogging up because I'm not getting really much air through the helmet at this point. So the wind coverage is almost as good as the GS Adventure from the previous bike. It's very close to that. It's better than the standard 1250 and 1200 GS before if you get this windshield set up with the electric windshield. And I think these big side deflectors have a lot to do with that. So I've got the cruise control set here at just a tiny bit over the speed limit. Although these speedometers are high, so I probably am going to speed limit, and everything's in miles per hour here in the States. So it's about 100 kilometers an hour that I'm going. And it's an incredibly calming, serene, smooth, quiet, luxurious, experience. And just like the previous GS, I'm so comfortable that I don't even have to ride with my hands on the handlebars. I don't recommend you ever do this, by the way. It's not what you should do, but this is the kind of stability and luxury that this motorcycle can provide you. It just floats down the road like you're on a cloud, and one of the reasons for that is the suspension has so much adjustment. So if I change riding modes, into dynamic riding mode, and as we're going to show in another clip here on this video, you can fine-tune the damping in the modes. But like if I switch the suspension to a firmer setting, like on dynamic, I start to feel all these little cracks in the pavement, and it's a much firmer damping. And if I go back to road mode there, like this, the ride smooths out again. That's the beauty of electronic suspension. Not only does it adjust your height and your preload and accommodate for different loads that you might be carrying, your passengers or luggage, off-road riding, on-road riding, but also you can change the comfort or the firmness of the ride. So when I hit the twisty roads, you know, I'm going to change the dynamic so we get a firmer controlled damping. But when I'm just cruising all day, I just run the soft damping, and it just rides like I'm on a cloud. So all these people saying that it's not as comfortable as the previous GS, I just think, I have no idea where that's coming from. I think that's completely false. In fact, the wind protection is so good, I can ride with my visor up. Now, I should be wearing glasses if I'm doing this. You need eye protection. But it's so good that I don't even feel wind in my eyes right now, and I'm going 65 miles an hour. Let's take a minute to talk about the different seat heights on the 1300GS. But to do that, we also have to talk about the optional adaptive ride height control. We also have to talk about and dispel one of the myths that this bike has an electrically assisted center stand, which it does not. So let's cover all this right now. Now, the new 1300GS has one of the widest ranges in seat heights of any motorcycle that I've ever reviewed or seen out there. So you can go anywhere between 31.5 inches all the way up to 35 inches, or about 800 millimeters to 890 millimeters. Now, the reason for this is a few different things. One is that the motorcycle comes in two different base heights of suspension travel. You can either get the standard suspension travel, which is 190 millimeter or 7.5 on the front, and 200 millimeter and 8 inches on the back. Or you can get the optional sport suspension, which really they should call the off-road suspension, because it's not sporty, it's just the off-road oriented option. And with that, you lose the adaptive ride height option, which we'll get to later. If you get that, you go up plus 20 millimeters or about 0.8 inches, bringing the whole motorcycle up. That extends your suspension travel for aggressive riding in off-road conditions. A couple other factors that affect the seat height. One is that there are different seat heights, seats, I should say, available. There's a low seat, a standard height seat, and a high seat. So you've got three different seat, actual different seats themselves with different heights. The other thing that changes the seat height is this bike has optional adaptive ride height control. My bike has it, and I really wanted to purchase a bike with this. What the system does is that when you're at a stop, the motorcycle lowers 30 millimeters. It's lower by 30 millimeters. So as you're coming to a stop, the motorcycle senses that, and it quickly drops the bike on the front and the back 30 millimeters or about 1.3 inches. It's very substantial, it's very noticeable. What this means is that my bike, with the adaptive ride height control and the standard seat height, I have a seat height of 820 millimeters or about, what is that, 32.3 inches. There's some really awesome things to know about the adaptive ride height control. Basically, it gives you the benefits of having a lower motorcycle. So in the past, you could get a GS with the low version, which was a lowered suspension, which took out some suspension travel for shorter riders. Now you get the benefit of that without the drawback. So as you're riding, you get full height 200 millimeter suspension, but when you're at a stop, the bike is 30 millimeters lower just automatically. You don't even really know what's happening, and I'll demonstrate this in some videos. It's one of the best new features on any motorcycle that I've ever tested. The reason for that is when you jump on this bike and you're pushing it around, or maybe you have to reverse into a parking spot or whatever, it's low to the ground, but you don't have the drawbacks that you used to have with getting a low motorcycle. Now, when you're off-road, what you can do is, so in the Enduro and Enduro Pro modes, the motorcycle does not self-lower when you come to a stop. You can choose, however, a low ride height or a high ride height. So you have that option there, but I think the thinking behind that is BMW didn't want, like if you parked on like over some rocks or maybe some obstacle, didn't want the bike like lowering down and hitting that. Maybe that's why it is, or something to do with that, I'm sure. But when you're in any of the road modes, which you should be when you're riding on the street, that adaptive automatic height control is enabled. Now, what if you don't get adaptive ride height control? Well, then your suspension is going to be at the same height. And then you also have the option of getting the sport suspension, which is the off-road suspension, which is 20 millimeters higher. The riders who should get that are if you want to ride very aggressively off-road and you're a very tall person, because that's going to jack you automatically. You're going to be 40 millimeters taller at least than this bike. if not more. Because think about it, you lose the adaptive ride height, that's 30 millimeters, and your suspension is 20 millimeters more. That's actually 50 millimeters. So if you want sport suspension, you're giving up effectively 50 millimeters in seat height because you can't get adaptive ride height and you're 20 millimeters taller on your suspension. It's important to understand this if you're going to purchase a 1300GS. All right, trying to finish up this discussion about the seat height, the riding position, the height of the bike and all this. So right now the bike is at the 820 millimeter seat height, so it's got the adaptive ride control and it's in a low position because we're stopped. So I am a 5'10" or 1.78 meter. I have a 32-inch inseam. You can see just how comfortable this is. I'm comfortably flat-footed on both sides. I have very good control. I feel like I'm very close to the ground, which is extremely confidence-inspiring. I just can't tell you the difference that makes, especially on a 500+ pound, 230 kilo plus motorcycle. So that's really, really nice. Now, let me show you what happens if I put the bike in a higher position. Okay, see now the bike is in enduro mode and it raised up 30 millimeters. So now you can see how much taller I am. So I have the enduro mode set up to be in high mode, but you can also configure this to be in low mode if you want, which is really, really cool. And I think shorter riders would appreciate having that choice. Now I'm going to put the bike back into road mode. See, I don't know if I have to turn the bike on to do this. Let's see. Yep, no, it does it with the ignition off or with the bike off. So now I'm back to my nice, comfortable, lower riding position. All right, so the motorcycle has a feature where it maxes out the preload to help you get the bike on a center stand, but it's not an electric center stand. You have to have the adaptive ride height to get this. So here's what happens is you fold out the little lever on the center stand. When you push the center stand down, there's a sensor in the bike that knows you're doing that. Now, I don't know if you could hear that, but that was the preload motors maxing out. Now it's easier to get the bike on a center stand, but you still have to push down and lift. So it's not an electric center stand. It just uses the adaptive ride height control and the preload motors to make it easier. This is a great feature, and I'm not sure why other motorcycles don't have this, frankly. In the previous video, a lot of the comments have sort of criticized my decision to buy a GS, saying it's too expensive. Why would you want that? You could buy 3 Transalps for the price and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I totally understand all that, but you have to understand, and I think a lot of people don't watch my channel or keep up with what I'm doing here. Big Rock Moto is a business, right? This is a content creation business. I am an independent motorcycle journalist. I review motorcycles, parts, gear, and all that. But part of how this business works is I buy the latest and greatest motorcycles to test and review and make videos with. Because if I don't put out videos on the latest and greatest stuff, whether it's affordable stuff or really premium luxury level stuff, if I don't have the latest and greatest, people won't click and watch the videos as much. So I'm trying to do my service of, purchasing some of the most important new bikes that come out, regardless of their price point, putting them through all these tests and reporting back to you and, trying to give a good, proper test. It's really a major liability for me. It's a major investment of capital to go out and make these purchases, whether I'm financing or paying cash or whatever the case may be, doesn't really matter. But I'm doing this mostly for the benefit of the community. Now, yes, I do get to ride these cool bikes as I'm testing them, use them as my personal bikes, go on some trips, do my own rides, but then I end up selling them, right, and have to start over again. That's part of my business model. I just want to be clear about that, but also to clarify why I would do something like this. I mentioned in a previous video, would I purchase the 1300 right now if it wasn't for content creation? Probably not, just because there's so many other good adventure bikes out there that meet my needs. I do love the GS, but I might have waited a year to kind of see if there's any early bugs and wait for the aftermarket to catch up. Plus, it's really expensive to buy this new. So anyway, I'm just trying to be transparent and explain that. Maybe the people who make those negative comments aren't even watching the whole videos and are not even seeing the segment right now. But if you are, there's an explanation. So I've got the bike back into road mode, which softens out my suspension damping. Man, this thing's quick. There's just so much pull from this engine, just unbelievable torque. Okay, I'm gonna show you the adaptive cruise control a little bit. So the bike has active cruise, which means, let's say I want to go 80 miles an hour. So I'll set my cruise at 80, and my distance, I've got low, medium, high. I'm in the medium setting. It's gonna follow that black Nissan. It's gonna pace. It's pretty far at this medium setting. That's where it's gonna keep me. And as that truck accelerates, the bike's gonna accelerate on its own. The reason you might like this is because it reduces fatigue over long distances. So instead of having to constantly adjust the cruise control, you know, it's going to keep pace with traffic jams, slower traffic, cars coming in and out, and it just keeps a comfortable distance away from the car in front. Now what happens is, if I merge, now it's going to accelerate. Okay, see, now it's accelerating up to the 81 miles an hour that I wanted. Got my windshield pretty much all the way up. So the adaptive cruise is great, and it can still detect that car way up there. Let's check out the blind spot stuff. Yep, you can see that little triangle light up in the mirror right there. That's my blind spot warning. So that's pretty good. That works well. So if there's a car in your blind spot, the mirror just lights up and tells you, you know, don't merge that direction because you have somebody in your blind spot. Now, here's my experience with this bike on the freeway. It's pretty phenomenal. I mean, I'm getting a little wobble from these rain grooves and these, yeah, these Karoo 4s have a little wobbly in the old rain grooves here. Wow, didn't expect that. I keep my hand on the bar then. But you can see now it's slowed down. Because the traffic in front of me is 76, it's slowed down a little bit. 73, 72. So that, you know, in California we have so much traffic on the freeways. This is really a helpful feature because I can just set my cruise once and then it just pilots its way through all this stuff. The wind protection is phenomenally good. I'd put it on par with the GS Adventure. Yeah, I think it's that good. What else? The other thing, did they change the gearing? You know what? 80 miles an hour, 4,200 77 miles an hour, about 4,200 RPM. 80 miles an hour is 4,300 RPM. I think they made the gearing taller. I'm gonna research that when I get home, and we'll put up the numbers here. But I feel like they made the gearing different. So that's interesting. That's really nice because the previous GS was carrying quite a bit more RPM at these speeds. Now we seem to be really relaxed. It almost feels like an RT from the gearing perspective. Man, there's just less and less reasons to buy an RT, isn't there? Because the electric windshield, the adaptive cruise, if the lower gearing thing is true or if it's just my imagination, but sure feels like it is. Other than this wobbling tire and these darn rain grooves, wow, what an amazing place to be. If I was going to ride a motorcycle cross country, I'd probably put this at the very top of the list right now, along with maybe like an RT or a Goldwing, but it's right up there for me, right at the very, very top. So some people will say the GS is too quiet, has a boring sound. Well, the nice thing about that is when you're cruising here at 80 miles an hour, it's super quiet. It's smooth, it's relaxing. It's just this little hum in the background that the motor's doing its thing. There's no vibration to the seat, the pegs, or the bars, like none. Maybe the tiniest bit in the handlebar. Wow, what an amazing place to spend time for high-speed, long-distance touring. Really, really impressive. Yeah, 85 miles an hour is only 4,600 RPM. So if they made the gearing taller, that's a really nice, welcome improvement. So I turned around and I've got the headwind, so I've got about a 30 mile an hour wind in my face and I'm going 80 miles an hour. My effective speed through the air is about 110 miles an hour. So you hear that, it's very, very windy, but with this electric screen all the way up and I can hide behind this windshield and kind of just scooch down a little bit, and I'm just in this pocket of still air, even in these very turbulent, windy conditions. So the aerodynamics on this bike, they spent a lot of time with this, I can tell, because I've tested a lot of motorcycles in these conditions, and Other than like a Goldwing or an RT, this is about as good as it gets. So very, very good job, BMW, with your aerodynamics and your wind buffeting and all the wind management. Very, very good. Okay, we're starting to get some traffic getting kind of stuck and stop and go a little bit. So like the bike, I didn't get the camera on in time, but the bike, I was going about 80, it decelerated all the way down to 30. You're able to shift gear with using the quick shifter and ride through these traffic jams using the adaptive cruise. So I'm not doing brake or throttle at all. I'm going through traffic jams from high speed to low speed, and the bike is doing the work for me. I'm not saying you should do this, but you can do this. The technology really is good. And see, as the traffic now starts to pull away, the bike will accelerate accordingly, and I can shift gears, like see right there, shift to gear with the quick shifter to accommodate for different speed, and it keeps my cruise control, which I really, really like. Not only does this work like on a highway in a straight line, it also works around bends, around corners. See how the bike is following this truck at the distance that I've set? I have the bike set to, I have it set to about 45 miles an hour. Well, I need to increase it now because he's getting away from me there. Man, there's so much gravel on these roads right now. What I'm trying to show you is that, see how the bike's decelerating? It'll keep the distance from that truck, even through these corners. Also, you know, you shouldn't necessarily rely on cruise control to go through a corner because you want to have control of your speed more directly, but the bike does have lean sensitive cruise control. So if it senses the lean angle is getting a little bit too much, it will actually start to reduce the speed. So I don't know if I can demonstrate that here. Well, see, it's picking up that truck again and slowing down. See, I'm not doing anything. I'm not recommending you do this, but the bike is able to pace around corners, other vehicles. It also works behind other motorcycles as well. So it's a pretty darn cool feature. Most people are going to use this on more straight roads, but if you want, you can even use it in situations like this. And there's a little icon that comes up when it tells you it's tracking a vehicle in front of you. You also have 3 different distances you can set. You have close, medium, and far. So this is the medium distance, and you can kind of see the distance it's keeping me from that truck. Let's take a brief walk around before we go ride and just give you the kind of the specs and figures real quick. We'll try to get through this super fast. So, you know, the bike is brand new. It's all new. So it doesn't really share anything with the previous GS. It's a ground up redesign. Now, BMW claims the weight is 523 pounds or 237 kilograms. However, we've already weighed this bike before I started putting some of the extras you see on, and I had 536 pounds when I got home from the dealer, or 243 kilograms. Other people online have reported much heavier weights, so my bike does have the forged wheels, which drop almost 2 kilos, and there's different options. There's a lot of options on these bikes, but we don't, you know, the consensus seems to be that it's heavier than BMW is claiming, but maybe it seem to be a little bit lighter than the 1250 GS. I don't think a massive weight savings is something that you should really look forward to. I think if there is a weight savings, it's relatively minor. However, the bike is slimmer, and it does feel a little bit lighter and smaller, and so that in the real world it works out, and maybe that's because they've just centralized the mass better. Let's talk about the power plant. So, of course, it's the famous Boxer engine that everyone's come to know, and some people have come to love, although not everybody. It's 1300 cc. It's 145 horsepower or 107 kilowatts, and 110 foot-pounds of torque or 149 newton meters. That is a phenomenal amount of torque, and definitely the most of any adventure motorcycle ever made. It's a high compression motor, 13.1 to 1, so you are going to need to run high octane fuel. Let's talk about the suspension on the GS. So yes, it still uses tail lever. They've redesigned the tail lever. It's now called Evo tail lever. It's lighter. They've mounted things a little bit differently, and it's supposed to improve the front end feel on the road, which is something that the GS needed. Your front travel your front travel is 7.5 inches or 190 millimeters. If you get sports suspension, that would add 20 millimeters to that, or about 0.8 inches. Rear suspension is 7.9 or 200 millimeters. And I'll show you the rear suspension back here. Now, there's a lot to talk about with the suspension, and we're going to probably devote a whole episode to this, because you can see here, there's actually, in this canister is another spring that's connected with an oil valve to the mainspring. This motorcycle has variable rate spring.
That is phenomenal. What other motorcycle has that? That is crazy. The reason that's good is because for varying weights and loads and riding conditions, changing the damping and the preload is often not enough. Sometimes you need a different spring rate for a different amount of weight or riding conditions. The bike is able to do that. It's able to vary the spring rate and increase the spring rate when needed, which is a major factor in why this is a superior suspension design to the previous GS. So we'll cover that more in future videos. Now our wheel and tire sizes are the same as before. I've got 120, 70, 19 on the front, and then the rear is a 170 width, and that's on a 17-inch wheel. And I do have the optional forged enduro wheels. So one of the comments that I got a lot on the first video and some of the social posts I put out there was, why do you have, people are saying cast wheels on your bike, right? They're not spokes, they're not really an off-road wheel design. You're crazy, you're an idiot, all that. Okay, so these are the new optional forged enduro wheels. They're a forged wheel, which means they're stronger than a cast wheel, and they're designed for off-road use. These are a $500 additional charge versus the spoke wheels, and I think a $1,000 upcharge from the regular standard cast wheels, which are not suitable for like hardcore off-roading. BMW they claim, and I can't prove this yet, they claim that these are as strong or comparable in strength to the cross-spoke wheels. The reason you might want these, and the reason that I wanted them and did get them, is because they're almost 2 kilograms lighter than spoke wheels for the set. That's a tremendous difference in unsprung weight. When you reduce the weight of the wheel and tire combination, or the brakes for that matter, or the lower suspension part, when you reduce that unsprung weight, you're making the suspension work better, you get better acceleration, you get better braking. The suspension has less work to do because it's not supporting much weight. Everything gets better. The bike's also going to handle much better, especially noticeable on the road and twisty roads on the pavement, things like that, transitioning corners, because you have less rotating mass, less inertia, less centrifugal force from the wheel tire combination. So the lighter weight, also there's less maintenance, there's no maintenance because there's no spokes, right? So, and they're also very beautiful in person. So less maintenance, lighter, they're supposed to be strong. All those benefits, easier to clean. So to me, they're a home run if, and this is a big if they don't end up folding in and breaking during off-road use. So that's the big question. I do think that if they are strong, as BMW claims, that they definitely worth $500 premium versus the spokes to get all the benefits that we're talking about. I can tell you there's a big handling improvement on this bike versus the previous GS's. Part of that could be the new chassis and everything, but I think part of it's this lighter wheel set. I'll take light wheels any day. They improve every single aspect of the bike. So they're not cast. They are designed for off-road. They're a forged wheel. They're a new option, and we're going to see how they work out. So one thing they've done is, they've done a lot. It's obviously all new. You can see the frame is completely different. They've gone away from the trellis frame, which was kind of a characteristic look that I liked too. I know a lot of you kind of miss it, but this new frame is more rigid. It's lighter. It's stronger. And there's less play because you don't have all those connection joints and things. So it is a better design. It just, the looks are going to take a little bit more getting used to. They've also moved the gearbox. I understand it's now kind of under the engine as opposed to being behind it. So the shaft drive is actually longer, which probably has some engineering consequences, which we're not going to get into right now. So they've done a lot. It's a whole new motorcycle from the ground up. Even though they've kept the basic GS stuff, the shaft drive, the boxer engine, the high torque, the fancy features, they've kept all that, but they have redesigned the bike. One controversial thing, a little bit, I suppose, is the fuel tank. So we've lost a liter or 0.3 gallons of gas. So we've gone from 5.3 gallons or 20 liters down to 19 liters or 5 gallons even. BMW is claiming improved fuel economy. I'm not sure if that's the case. We need more time to test that, but we'll try to take a look at that on today's ride if we can. So my bike, you can see here, has the optional sports brake, which you get, I think, on the premium package or whatever. Most of them are coming with this. So it is a Brembo brake. I don't know if you can see, there's a Brembo logo on the other caliper. It's hard to get the camera in here to see that, but it is actually Brembo. They just branded the outside of it BMW. So there you go. And these are 310 millimeter discs. My bike also has this, which is they call it the double exhaust. It's, let me get this right because I got blasted in the last video, a Krapovich. There, are you happy? Akrapovic, designed for BMW Motorrad. So my thought is this doesn't save any weight, it doesn't add any sound, and they charge you $1,000 upcharge for this. So does that seem like a good deal to you? I guess if you just want the looks of that, which is kind of cool, I guess. But other than that, you're not really getting anything for your $1,000 upcharge. I've got Metro Karoo 4 tires. What else? My bike has the top case carrier for the Vario bags. I did have the Vario side case carriers, but I had to take those off because to mount my Touratech pannier racks. One cool thing I wanted to show was that the center stand's down right now, but it has this thing here. So I'll show this, but when this is folded up, it's kind of nice and tucked out of the way. All right, so here you go. I put the bike down on the side stand. So on the previous bike, you had a tang that kind of folded up here and was always out. Well, now that folds away, and that's really nice. I really appreciate that. So the reason I'm down here on my knees, you can see, so the catalytic converter, I think, is this here. So I think they've moved that from the previous bike. So you're gonna have a hard time kind of opening up the sound of the bike by changing just the slip-on part, because if you just change this part back, I'm not sure how much sound improvement you're really gonna get. So just for transparency, transparent headlight. My bike does have a few mods already because I'm trying to get this bike ready for the riding I intend to do. So Touratech has been sending out stuff. Let me back up. I am working with a bunch of aftermarket companies to show products on this bike, so I'm not getting paid by any of those companies to advertise. However, I'm just doing this for your benefit as a viewers. So I'm doing Touratech stuff to show that. Then I'm going to do SW Motec. I'm going to do the Outback Motortech stuff. Fingers crossed. Might do advrider. So I'm trying to do that. It's only for your benefit. It doesn't benefit me because it's really time consuming to change out all the parts. But right now I've got some Touratech stuff. So I've got their headlight protector. You can see the controversial, front headlight design there. Factory windshield. One of the reasons they had to change the headlight is because they need to make room for the front radar sensor. We'll show how the radar works out on the road. My bike also has the $500 optional LED fog lights, which is the same units as you got on the previous GSs and other BMWs. Honestly, they don't put out much light and they're not really worth the money, but they do give you extra visibility in the daytime to oncoming traffic and things like that, and they give you a little bit of kind of fill lighting at night. You can see they've made the oil sight glass much easier to read, so I do like that. I have a Touratech Expedition skid plate, which is pretty cool, so I'm testing that out. The factory skid plate was really very, very cheesy for sure, literally made of cheese. These foot pegs are horrible. These are the factory foot pegs. My bike didn't come with the Enduro pack, so the Enduro pack gives you the cylinder guards, crash bars, the turn signals move to the fairing, and then you get bigger pegs and a different brake lever. I wish I would have had that pack, but I just couldn't get a bike with it. So these are going to have to be changed out because standing up on those is painful. So I've got the Touratech pannier rack with my Moscow wedges on here to mount my Moscow bags. One thing I appreciate about this rack is look how narrow this is. This is really, it's about 19 inches wide. So the luggage, and I'll show this, is kept really nice and narrow, which is great. I appreciate that. So that it's really tight to the bike. Coming around, you can see the shaft drive. I have an SW Motec little axle slider here. I know I've done some other stuff. Of course, I'm running the Nomax tank bag. So the turn signals are in the handguards. They're really bright, so I do appreciate that, but it's going to make changing handguards more complicated and expensive if you break these. I have some Hepco Becker exoskeleton cages that go around these that are metal that should solve that problem. They're supposed to arrive today actually, or tomorrow, so we'll get those on as soon as we can. Also, I really need to get crash bars on this bike because I'm super nervous about dropping it over without crash bars. It's super vulnerable with the Boxer engine and not having crash bars. That's not a good idea. I just don't have any crash bars at the moment. I'm just waiting for some to arrive. I don't even know what company's crash bars are going to get here first. Also, I want to say huge thanks to all the companies who support the work I'm doing and allowing me to test all these different things. So really do appreciate the partnership that all those companies have shown. I don't know how it looks in the video, but the bike is very narrow with pannier racks, so really like how narrow they've kept the racks, and the bags are definitely inside the handlebar width. I know the video may not show that, but the handlebars are definitely quite a bit wider than these 25-liter backcountry bags. So it's a really nice, compact little setup. Just say how much I love my Nomex tank bags. I mean, you can organize everything. I've got my helmet cleaner in here. I've got some stickers. I've got eye drops and chapstick in that compartment in here. I've got some multi-tools, Leatherman. I've got a charging cord. I've got my Garmin InReach. The next little fold up, I've got snacks. I've got my other camera. I've got the hydration in here. You've got a sunglasses pouch. So good for organization. It's such a brilliant design. Moto, they're just so clever. All right, let's do a little sporty riding with the 1300. So I'm going to go to, there's two things. I want to firm up my suspension because in the road mode, the suspension's soft and you can tune that. But the road damping is very soft and floaty, which is good, but not on a twisty road where I want to be more aggressive. So I can go to dynamic or dynamic pro mode, which has a lot of things. It sharpens the throttle response. It reduces the sensitivity of the traction control and the ABS, does all that. I can do that, or I can stay in road mode and then go into the menu and just change the damping to dynamic damping, which firms it up. But anyway, moral of the story is I'm just going to use dynamic mode. I don't really love the sharper throttle response. I like the throttle response in road, but it's just easy to do it this way.
Holy moly! Oh my word. My heart rate is already up there. Shoo! Woo! Oh my gosh. Okay, let me slow down a little bit so I can talk. I can't narrate when I'm riding quick. Okay, so the 1300, it should be a lot better than the previous GSs, right? It's lighter, it has a stiffer frame, it has all new suspension, has more power, has more torque, all of these things. And I have the forged wheels, which are lighter, which makes it steer better. And it is better. It's a lot sportier than the previous GSs. Whoa! Woo! Holy moly! This bike is so easy. It's almost scary how easy it is to ride extremely quickly, but still have the sense of security and confidence, because you have linked brakes, which means that when I jam into the front brakes, it balances out the rear brake pressure to keep the bike balanced, and it gives me that extra traction from the back. Oh, there's so much torque! And I can just come flying into corners like this, trail braking hard, because one, I have tail lever suspension, so when I'm hard on the brakes, there's really no chassis dive, because it doesn't dive like a traditional fork does, right? And that linked braking means that my brakes are super powerful and super balanced. So combining all that with the low center of gravity, it's so easy to ride this bike quick. I mean, it's almost like a cheat code, right? Woo! Thing's good. So the GS has always kind of had these unique qualities, right? The linked brakes, well, mostly. the tail lever suspension. They've just made all that better. They've just improved all those aspects and it just made it better. The quick shifter also, as we've discussed, is much better. So see, I'm trying to show you the quick shifter is a huge improvement. There still is some clunk in and out of first gear, but that's kind of forgivable. I think it's something to do with the shaft drive and the boxer motor. It just gives you a little bit of clunk on that second to first, or that first to second gear change. But all the other gear changes are nice and smooth. Man, this thing. I can tell you right now, there's no other motorcycle that I've ever tested that I'm so confident to go so quickly in real world conditions. Now, on a racetrack, is a multi-strada going to be a little bit better? Yeah, probably. Maybe even a KTM 1290. I don't know for sure. Wouldn't be a huge difference, but in a real world, because of the tail lever, because I can trail brake like mad coming into corners, and you always should be trail braking, by the way, even on a regular suspension. Man, this thing, it's so hard to beat this. It doesn't feel like a big heavy touring bike. It feels super agile, super nimble, super sporty, and then you just have this ridiculous amount of power and torque. The horsepower isn't anything crazy, but the torque is. The torque is really impressive. So to sum it up, this thing is a pretty phenomenal sports bike, and if your purpose with the GS is to tear up twisty roads and go through the Alps in Europe or wherever it might be, the GS has always been a top choice for that, and they've just made it even better. It's truly impressive, and one of the best handling and most agile and most fun to ride street bikes that I've ever tested of all categories. It's really quite impressive. Some people have asked about the braking. So the deal with the new brakes is that they do have a softer initial feel, and at first you're like, oh, the brakes feel kind of soft, but the thing is they're more progressive, so they have that softer initial bite, but then let me show you. Brake. The braking performance is as good as it ever was. It's just you have more feel now, so there's more linear or more progressive action, which means a finer control of that first like 20% of braking, which I think is good, because the previous bike could be a little bit jumpy on the brakes sometimes. When I was at the Yamaha Champion Riding School, they kind of were giving me feedback about that. So that first 10% of the brake, that's softer, or maybe the first 30% is softer, and then it still ramps up to full power. But I think it's an improvement. But some test riders have felt, oh, the brakes feel kind of spongy. That's because they're not braking very hard. If you get hard into the brakes are super powerful. It's just that initial feels a little bit softer, which I actually think is an improvement. So I hope that makes sense. Woo! Okay, one final thing about the road riding on the new GS. So front end feel, feedback through the front tire. I know it's getting a little bit technical, but the tail lever suspension has always had this thing, or you don't have this very good feel from the front tire, right? The communication of the steering kind of feels vague. The new Evo tail lever is better, but it still has that downside. So that's the trade-off you get, right? I still will take the tail lever every day for the real world riding that we have, because when a deer jumps out of me in the middle of a corner on a mountain road, I can brake like crazy and still be confident. Plus, when I'm coming downhill on the brakes, I still have full suspension travel. I love the tail lever for all these reasons, but it does lack some feel. The new bike is better. They've added some feel back into it, which is great, but it's still not really good feel, and it's not what you get from a traditional suspension. So it's still a potential downside there, just to be transparent and honest, and give you guys an honest, balanced perspective about this.
So we just did that sport riding, and not that it's anything really that impressive, honestly, on a public road, but we're on knobby tires. Look at that, guys. So that was on off-road Karoo 4 tires. Imagine how much better it will be on street tires. Now, sorry, I was having a Cliff Bar. I'm taking this bike to the racetrack in Arizona, Indy Motorsports Ranch in May for the Yamaha Champ School. I'm doing the 2-day school again. I'm going to take the GS, I'm going to put road tires on it, and we're really going to see how she is on the track. I'll be wearing leathers and doing the whole, sport biker thing. So that'll be interesting. So stay tuned for that. But even on knobby off-road tires, very impressive. The limits of this thing on the road, very, very nice. And you can see not too much chicken strip there left on the sides. I don't like that term, by the way. I don't think that's a fair term. I think it should be called an idiot strip, because if you don't have any little strip left, you're an idiot, because you need to be leaving some margin of safety. But that's pretty far over, I would say. Quick look at the gear I'm using to make today's video possible. I have the CD Adventure 2 Gore-Tex boots. I have the Revit Echelon Gore-Tex waterproof riding pants. I have the Alpenstars Bogota Pro Dry Star jacket, 4-season jacket, plenty of vents, great storage, super comfortable, full armor, including chest armor pockets. One of my new favorite jackets for sure. Really love this thing. It's got liners as well for cold and for wet that you can wear over or under. Then in terms of the helmet, this is going to be your Climb Cryos Pro. I always go back to this, super lightweight, super breathable, transitions photochromic face shield. And then on the helmet, I've switched everything to DJI cameras. DJI is now a partner of the channel, but they don't pay me to make videos, but I do get free cameras. DJI Osmo Action 4s, I've actually got 3 of these. And then I'm also using their Osmo Pocket 3, an amazing little blogging camera with a built-in gimbal. Phenomenal. I use a, what is this, a Rode lavalier mic inside the helmet to try to get better audio. Gloves, I'm using Revit Off-Track 2 gloves. And then my luggage is provided by Moto today, so I've got the Nomax tank bag. I love this thing because it's like an organizer, has a space, a pocket for everything, all the little dividers. It just keeps me organized. Plus, I have my hydration bladder in there, so I don't have to wear a backpack, which is really nice because it keeps the weight off me. And then I'm using Moto Backcountry 25s. These are the latest version that they have. These are the smaller 25 liters and installed. That's as easy as it gets. And it's the best soft luggage in the world, and I'll put my name to that. Stopped for a quick break and to show you a couple things on the new bike that I just wanted to point out. So the handlebar, you obviously can't really tell just from looking at it, but I believe that the handlebar, and some other people have measured this, is a little bit wider than on the previous GS. This may contribute to the feeling of better handling, more agile handling, because you have more leverage against the bars. So that's interesting that they chose to do that. Some people have mentioned the comfort. Does it feel a little less comfortable, a little more sporty maybe than some of the previous GSs? Well, first of all, this is not a GS Adventure. This is the normal GS, which is a little bit different. And the Adventure model's coming, next year probably, or later this year, I guess, later 2024. So the seats, I do feel that they have made the seats a little bit firmer. Well, I can tell you for sure. So this is called the comfort seat. It is heated. I do feel it's a firmer foam density than the previous bike. That could be a good or bad thing. It just depends on your perspective. I think I prefer a little bit firmer seat. The previous one was comfortable, but it was almost a touch too soft. So some people might feel it's firmer and think it's less comfortable. But I found from doing long days touring, like 8 to 10 hours on the bike at a time, that a firmer seat's actually better. But again, that's really not up to me. That's a personal preference thing. The other thing would be this here. So you see the distance between the foot peg and the seat. Without a 1250 here and a tape measure to compare and the comparable seats and pegs and everything, it's hard to say, but I do feel like there might be a tiny bit less leg room. I feel like my legs are at a little bit tighter angle on this bike, and I can't prove that, and we need to kind of get a closer comparison to the previous GS. But I feel like maybe they either raised the pegs a little bit, or maybe they've lowered the seat a little bit, even though this is the standard seat. Now, you can get taller seats, of course, to remedy that, but maybe that's what some people are feeling. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Are you noticing maybe less legroom? I feel like I notice a tiny bit less legroom than the previous bike, but I can't really prove it. And there's so many things that kind of go into the ergonomics. So one other thing they have here, and I have to kind of unclip my tank bag here to show you, is they now have a phone case on the bike. The phone case fits a large phone. Let me grab my phone here. So this is a Galaxy S22 Ultra. So this is the big one, and it actually does fit. So it's a padded case, and then you can close it. Works pretty cool, and it does have charging. This will also allow you to use the integrated infotainment of the bike for media calls, things like that. Under here, there's a little USB that rotates. So some people have had trouble hooking it up. They didn't realize that this actually rotates like that. And then this is it's a USB-A connector. So pretty universal there. So you can plug in your phone to charge it in here, waterproof compartment. And if you use a tank bag, it's going to go over that, of course. But that's pretty handy to have. I think you could also probably figure out a way maybe to route the cable externally if you wanted to hook your phone and have it charging on a quad lock mount. Like I have a quad lock that goes here when I not running the camera, or whatever else like that. But it is nice that they finally made a phone case that's actually big enough. All right, from the cockpit of the GS, there's a lot to talk about here, but let's briefly cover what's different, what's new, and maybe what's not new. So you notice the ignition button is no longer here. There used to be a button here for the ignition. Now they've moved it here. I don't like this, and I'll tell you why that is. So this used to be a dedicated button for heated grips and heated seat that you could press and then get into that here on the TFT quickly. Well, now it's buried in these menus over here. So I'm not sure if it was cost saving or packaging reasons or because they have this weird new handlebar mount, but that was a downgrade in my opinion. I don't mind having the ignition button here. You can see this is the power button. So it's going to fire off there, and it's pretty quick to start up, which I like, but we basically lost a button. You have a riding mode button here, stop, start, switch here. The SOS, which in the USA is tied to a cell phone service, it's not satellite, so it doesn't replace your inReach or your Zoleo or whatever you might have. It's just basically an emergency call button, but you do have to have cellular service to be able to do that, so don't be relying on that too much. The same old GPS mount we've always had before, so that's good. Windshield is a lot different. Much better wind coverage now. This is more comparable to the GS Adventure in the past, now that you get with the standard GS. Now, if you get like the sport windshield and you don't get the electric windshield, you don't get these kind of elephant ear, Dumbo ear things here, which provide a huge amount of wind protection, and you don't get the electric. So speaking of electric screen, my bike has the optional electric screen. You can see the range of adjustment is very wide and very useful. And it's one of the best upgrades on this bike. So that brings me to, well, the TFT is the same as a carryover from before, which I kind of feel like they should have done something new for the increased price that we're seeing, but it is what it is. We're getting the same screen. They have added a few things, which I'll show in a minute. Now, the left switchgear control, this is where things fall apart a little bit for me. So you've got this, what I call the hamburger button, or I think BMW calls it the multi-controller button, and you have this rocker switch here. So how this works is that, well, first of all, you've got your normal stuff. The cruise control still here, hazard lights, horn, turn signal. That hasn't changed. The multi-controller, or Wonder Wheel as we call it, is still the same, which is good. But they've changed this arrangement. So gone are the dedicated buttons for like the traction control and the suspension. That's gone now. So they've added more control features. So you have the electric windshield, you have height adjustment, you have damping adjustment, you have a lot more stuff to control, but they did not change the switchgear, and that's, in my opinion, this is a big mistake, and I think a cost-cutting measure that is kind of unforgivable, because now you have to go into this to do a lot of the functions that you want to do when you're going down the road on a normal ride. Let me talk about what I mean. So if I want to get into my heated grips or heated seat, the buttons here is no longer. So now there's basically two ways to use this multi-controller switch. If you hit it once, it's going to go into the configuration of what do I want this multi-controller to adjust. Right now I have it set to the windscreen. Okay, so that means that when I use the rocker switch, I'm controlling my windscreen. Okay, I can change that. I can change it to traction control, heating, damping, which I can fine tune the suspension damping, which is awesome now that we can do that. Ride height, adaptive cruise control, the following distance. So I could do that if I wanted to. That would allow me to change things on the fly. The other, so there's two functions here, which is good, which some people have skipped over in their reviews. If you hold down, well, first let me get out of this. So there's two shortcuts you have. You can, if you hold this down, I have that set to the heating. So when I held it down, now it pulls up my, well, it went away. If I hold it down, it pulls out my grip heating and my seat heating. Then I can use my buttons to control that. Then it goes back to windshield. So you have that. So you see how it says here heating hold. So I have that set to the hold feature, and I have the windscreen set here to the. So you do have kind of two things you can control at once. But the problem is, you're going to need to adjust other things. So you're going to need to go in and adjust your following distance on your cruise. You might need to adjust your traction control. You might need to adjust your damping, your ride height. And now you're going to have to go and do this button dance and go into the menus to get to those things. I think that's a mistake. They should have added more buttons here. Anyway, I'm not going to go any further into it, but you get what I'm saying. There's not enough buttons to control things. Now, you do get used to it, and it's not a deal breaker, but it's kind of frustrating that they just cheaped out and carried over the switchgear when they should have done something new to accommodate all the new features that this has. Let me know if I'm crazy and you disagree, but I think I'm right here. The other unforgivable thing, in my opinion, is they did not backlight the switches. So in carrying them over, they basically just repainted the buttons. They didn't backlight it. So on this motorcycle was $28,000 plus tax. I still don't get backlit switchgear. I've got a Tiger in the garage that's about $17,000, and that has backlit switchgear. Even the KTM 390 Adventure and much cheaper bikes have backlit switches. So this is really getting inexcusable at this point. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's really dumb. Now, it sounds like I'm being super negative. I am being a little negative because I want to point this out. These things aren't deal breakers, and they're definitely things you learn to live with, but they could be improved. And I hope when they make maybe a mid-cycle refresh on this thing that they'll consider redoing this, because it's a little frustrating to have to do this button dance to do things that you might want to do.
So this is a perfect example of a situation where the switchgear is inadequate. So I've got my windshield setting to the multi-controller here. I'm on the freeway, right? I've got my hold down button setting to the heated grips. But now I want to adjust my distance, my adaptive cruise control distance, right? Which is because this bike has active cruise. So I can't do that. The only way to do that now is I have to click this. I have to go in here to the menu while I'm trying to pay attention to the freeway. Select this. Now I don't have control of my windscreen anymore, but I have control of my ACC distance. So I'm going to set it shorter, right? Okay. Now it's going to accelerate because it's going to close that gap there, that car in front of me. But now I have no control of my windshield setting. And the whole point of having an electric windshield is to be able to adjust it all the time as you're riding. But now I can't do that. Now I have to go back in here, change this back to my windscreen. And now I've got, see, it's not a lot, but it's still going into the menu while I'm riding to do this. I don't like that at all. They should have redone the switchgear. It's just there's no excuse for this. The switchgear needs to be revised.
Now, there are some new things in here. So we have the sport mode, okay? If we go into sport mode, it changes my layout. It shows me my lean angles that I'm achieving. It shows you the percentage of my traction control that's intervening. It shows you my brake deceleration, meters a second squared, how hard you're braking. You have like lap timers, I think, and stuff like that in here, if I'm not mistaken. So it's pretty cool. This is a carryover from some of their other models, like the S1000XR and other bikes. So that's good, but I don't really need it that much. Everything else is going to be really familiar, except now you have more settings. So, suspension, damping configuration. This is really, really cool. Now, before you had to choose from remember you had road and dynamic, or you had enduro damping. That was pretty much it, right? Well, now you can go into each setting. Like, let's say you want enduro damping. I have it set to -2 because I found that to be better. You have 5 different levels. You can do standard enduro, you can increase the damping by 2 levels or decrease it by 2 levels. Okay, and you can do that in any of these modes. So let's say you find road mode to be too soft, for instance, the road damping. Now you can say, okay, I want road to be firmer. You have 2 choices there. Really, really key that they added this, and I'm so grateful that we finally have this. So you have these 3 settings here for damping. That's awesome. Cruise control. So you can set the behavior of the dynamic cruise control. We'll talk about that later. Front collision warning, it has a warning pulse and braking assistance. It's not going to stop the bike for you if you're going to ride into a wall or a truck, but it will give you a little bit of warning there and a little bit of brake pressure assistance. This is the blind spot monitors. They call it LCW. Hill start control, which I'll show you. Let's see what else. If you go into vehicle settings, you know, you can, oh, I got to do the shift light. I'm going to turn that off because it gets really annoying. Riding mode pre-selection. So you can choose what 4 riding modes you want this button here to toggle between. So the 4 modes that I want to toggle are rain, road, dynamic, and Enduro Pro. Those are the ones I use, but yours might be different. You can also configure the display in here. You can change the brightness. We'll go to 80%. I guess that's fine. You can do status line contents. You can turn these things off if you don't want. I just have them all turned on. It tells you how long you've been drinking coffee, which of course is definitely a BMW GS thing. Turn your speed limit off and on. So anyway, I'm kind of doing a deep dive here, which I didn't mean to, but you get the point. There's pretty good functionality and it's pretty easy to use despite some of the complaints that I've levied.
All right, it's the end of the day, but let's squeeze in the off-road testing of the big GS. Now, this is just going to be more of a first impressions off-road. I'm going to do a full like off-road torture test like I've done with some of the other test bikes. The reason we're not doing that now is because, well, you can see the reason. I don't have the crash bars yet, I don't have handguards yet, and I'm missing a few things. So we're not going to be doing extreme stuff, but we'll do the best we can because I want to give you guys a good impression about how this is off-road and of course kind of how it compares to some of the previous GSs. So a few things we should talk about: electronics, traction control, ABS, the linked brakes, how the suspension works off-road, the tail lever functions, and how they've improved it versus the 1250, which they really have because you have a lot more control of how the suspension works. So jumping aboard here, again, just having that low seat height because of the adaptive ride control is super nice. Now that's going to change a little bit when we go into the off-road mode. So the way the electronics work on the big GS is that, so the riding modes, so I've got Enduro Pro set up on my pre-selection. So there's Enduro. Now you can customize these if you want. Okay, you can change the traction control, the ABS settings within the modes, as well as the suspension damping and the Enduro damping. So Enduro mode would give you a lot of traction control intervention and it would leave your rear ABS on, just turned down. Enduro Pro, how that comes set up is it's going to turn the rear ABS off, leave the front ABS on, and it's going to turn traction control into more of a slide control where it still intervenes, but it lets you slide a decent amount. Now, it's disappointing that they didn't include a slide control system. I really wish they would have updated the electronics to do that. Something like the Ducati has or the KTMs have, where you have like 1 through 7 or 1 through 9, or the Africa Twin also has that. It's really disappointing that such a premium price, we still only get really a couple traction control settings, and a lot of off-road riders, because it's pretty intrusive, are still going to end up turning it off entirely. Well, let's talk about suspension a little bit. So if we go in here into the menu, let's see, we go to settings. Okay, we select that, assist, suspension, damping configuration. So I've been playing around with this. I found that, see, and this is something we didn't have on the previous bike, so this is a big upgrade. I found that going -2 all the way down on the damping gave me the best ride and control, just dialing that damping out. But we can play with that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at -2. It comes at 0, so I'm taking damping out, which means the suspension reacts faster. All right. It's really cool to have that. Now, of course, we also have the variable spring rate, which comes into play on the new GS, which we didn't have before. And overall, this is definitely a much better suspension setup. But it is different from traditional forks, and we need to discuss how that works. Now, if I want to control my traction control, I can actually configure my traction control to the quick or the multi-select button here. So now, let's go back. Now, if I hold it down, it's going to turn traction control off, so I can do that. But I've lost my windscreen adjustment because, well, we've talked about how those controls work. But for off-road, I'm going to leave my windshield all the way down. The nice thing about having the electric windshield is that, well, off-road, it's down and out of your way, and then when you get on the highway, you can raise it up with a button, and you have the good wind protection. So that's cool. Let me turn off my heated grips and heated seat. So I've got that shortcut program, so turn that off, turn that off. Okay, that's good there. I've got my Enduro Pro mode. I've got my damping set where I want. I think we are good to go. Oh, now what happened is I felt the bike raise up about that 30 millimeters or 1.3 inches. So it's in a high position now. Because when you're in the off-road modes and you have adaptive height control, you have to tell it, do you want high or low? Now I can go in and tell the bike to be in the low position, and let me do that right now. So I can go here to ride height. Okay, now I can go into low ride height. So off-road, and it's a substantial difference, okay? Now I want to go up. I go up, and now I have it set to this button. I can do it all I want. So that's pretty cool. But I'm going to set this back to DTC so I can turn the traction control off quickly if I want to. Now on something like the big GS, you know, it really benefits a lot from standing up and riding. Now going up this hill, the trail starts to get very, very rough up here. It's always where I take the bikes to do the suspension testing. Okay, so whoa, that's a big one there. You know, okay, so you're still riding a big old heavy bike for off-road, okay? It's not like the GS has suddenly become like a middleweight bike or a T7 or an 890 or whatever. It has not. It still has some of the drawbacks and kind of the bulky feeling and the weighty feeling that the 1250 had. But I will say a few things that have improved. The suspension is a lot better. So in terms of the damping, in terms of that spring rate that can stiffen up when it needs to, the suspension doesn't seem to crash through the bigger bumps like it did before. And I feel like I have much better control. The suspension is a big improvement. You just have to understand you're riding a 540 pound, 250, 240 kilogram motorcycle off-road, and you need to respect it. So when you only have that 200 millimeters of suspension travel, it makes I have to say though, for 200 millimeter travel, it sure does a hell of a good job. I mean, I'm sitting down going 50 miles an hour through some pretty rough terrain here, and the bike just seems to sort it out. So you also have dynamic damping, so it's always adjusting based on the sensors and things. That's the cool thing about having dynamic electronic suspension. Now coming downhill and like being on the brakes, this is one area where the GS to me is like cheating, because it really excels. Like I can just like see that burst of acceleration with the torque. Now if I need to slow down, I just jam on my front brake. Because it has linked brakes, it puts the rear brake on for me at the right amount, which is like cheating, right? You don't even have to use the rear brake pedal unless you want to slide the rear. Whoops, stalled out. Unless you want to slide the rear like that, or I stalled the bike, you can use the rear brake. But the link brakes is really cool. Also, because there's no brake dive, you can be on the brakes like this, and it maintains full suspension travel. So if you have bumps going downhill and stuff while you're under braking, you still have that full suspension travel because your forks are not diving like they would on a traditional bike. So it's a bit like cheating in that respect. So if I just want to crawl along, like the braking is phenomenal on these bikes, phenomenal off-road braking. Because of the tail lever keeping the chassis flat, and because of the rear brake being linked to the front, it's so good. The other thing is, like low speed control, low speed balance on this bike is exceptional. Like really exceptional. So 6 miles an hour in first gear, can stand up. I feel so comfortable traveling at these low speeds. I got no throttle. The bike doesn't feel top heavy or like it's going to tip over. It's not going to stall out. I can even just come to a complete stop, not touch the ground, come to a complete stop, not touch the ground, pull away slowly in first gear, like a tractor, right? People call the GS the tractor. It kind of is. So the bike's really good at lower speeds off-road. It really excels with that kind of balance and poise. When you try to ride it fast, you start to run into the suspension. You start to run into the fact that, you know, this is a very heavy motorcycle. So it's not a revolution compared to the previous bikes. It's more of a gentle evolution. It's improved. The suspension is probably the biggest improvement. The extra power doesn't matter off-road. That's not really helping you out. I would say, you know, the suspension is really the thing that stands out to me as the improvement. The bike does feel a little bit lighter and slimmer and a little bit more manageable, but it doesn't like have that big jump where you're like going into that smaller middleweight bike. So I don't think it replaces your middleweight adventure bike. They just took what was already good about the previous big GS and they've just refined it and made it better. All that being said, it's pretty easy and pretty fun to get after it off-road on this thing, and you'd be amazed at what these things can go through for what is effectively, you know, a tall street bike. Let's hit this big rut here. Yeah, you know, the suspension is really good. Like you can feel the spring rate almost like it ramps up when you go through a big dip. You can feel that suspension kind of ramping up and giving you the stiffness you need. Like watch this rut right here. See, it didn't bottom out. It felt really controlled. Because the engine has so much torque, I mean, you can be crawling along in second gear and then just shoot off like a rocket. You know, there's a lag. The suspension has a lag. You know, if it detects a big impact, it takes time for it to ramp everything up. So sometimes you can still catch it off guard. If you hit something quickly, you know, it doesn't have time to react to it. But it's pretty amazing how good of a job it still does. I mean, it shouldn't be able to do this. It shouldn't be this good, but damn, these things are so impressive for what they are. Ooh, okay. Go around that one. So telelever and linked brakes. What it means is that, let's say I'm coming up to this rut too fast, coming downhill, I can just jam the brakes, the chassis stays settled, and then I can work my way through the obstacle. No other adventure motorcycle really has that level of downhill braking control while maintaining the suspension travel. I'm really impressed that the suspension doesn't bottom in that rut. I have the camera set up there to try to capture that. That's very, very impressive performance and a huge upgrade to this bike. One of the things that the GS has always been surprisingly good at, sometimes maybe even better than some of the smaller adventure bikes, honestly, is real slow speed maneuvers, sliding around, like doing a brake slide or J-turns or quick stops, quick acceleration, just because it has this level of balance. So let me at least try to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So like I can do U-turns at very low speeds, just super easy to modulate the hydraulic clutch. Try to ride over here by my camera. I can stand up and balance the bike at almost no speed. Right there, totally balanced. Take off slowly. That ability to ride smooth at a low speed and do these tight maneuvers, part of it is because I practice this stuff, but part of it's also because the GS is just actually really good for this kind of thing. Let me turn my traction control off. Okay, traction control is now off. You know, if I want to slide and do my braking, it's surprisingly proficient at doing that. It almost feels too easy. Wee! Of course, it's easier to do that left-handed. All right, so what's my overall off-road impression of the new GS? They took the things that were good about the outgoing bike and they just made it better. Remind you of the street performance, right? It's kind of along the same lines. Now, I will say one thing that I think is a pretty huge improvement is the suspension. I don't know what the magic is, if it's the damping, it's the variable spring rate, the fact that you can now fine-tune the damping as well, but it all comes together. And I mean, again, this is just my first day really riding it around a lot off-road, or second day really, but the suspension performance is impressively good. And I didn't really expect that because they've always kind of cheaped out on that aspect with the big GSs, sadly. I don't think they did that this time, so feels really good. It can take some pretty big hits at high speed, but it's pretty supple when you want it to be. You can tune it, so all that's good. And all the stuff I always liked about the GS before, the tractor-like nature, the good low speed control, balance, good clutch control, the low center of gravity, smooth throttle response, good electronics package, all that's still there. So it's not a revolution, I don't think, but it's enough better off-road that I think that if you upgraded from like a 1200 or 1250, I think you'd probably notice the improvements. It's just not an earth-shattering difference. It doesn't replace an 890 or a T7 or a Touareg 660. It's probably like 80% of that off-road, and then of course on-road you get all the big benefits of this bike. But we'll have more comparisons later. But anyway, I hope this was useful. There's been a lot of negativity and even hostility towards the new GS. It's not really my place to tell you what kind of reaction to have to a new bike. I'm really just here to give you stats and figures, test the performance, test the capabilities, and make comparisons the best that I can. But I'll say a couple things. I think maybe some of the negativity, and this has been going back to ever since BMW had launched this bike. I think one aspect of it is people like to hate on high-end products. You know, they're held to a very high standard, something that's really expensive. A lot of people can't afford that, so you end up with this sort of reaction to that, right?
The other thing is that, you know, they changed the design, the styling quite a bit. So it is slimmer. It may look a little less bulky, a little bit less tough to some people. I would say in person, I really like how it looks in person more than in photos. And I think most people do. So the looks could be part of it. I mean, I'm curious to know, like, do any of you have any insight into what's all the negativity about with the new GS? Because I'm finding it to be an astonishingly good motorcycle in almost every single respect, with a couple little niggles. Yes, it's a premium product at a premium price, but luxury goods exist. I mean, you could argue that, I mean, people are saying you could do the same thing for a fraction of the price with a cheaper bike. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I know. We've test bikes like that on this channel all the time. You could buy a Honda Accord or Honda Civic, and it's effectively, I mean, reasonably the same thing as a Ferrari or a Porsche, but also they're not the same, right? So there are products at different price points out there. You have to choose what's right for you. Whether something is a good value is really about your perspective on everything and what you're looking for. And it's not up to me to tell you what budget you have or how much you should spend. And there are people who can afford nice things, and let's not be too judgmental towards that. I think, you know, it's kind of unfair because, like, if somebody who rides a really nice motorcycle, drives a really nice car, is being super judgy and negative towards someone who drives a cheaper car, that's not nice either. So I think it goes both ways. All right, well, we're at the end. I hope you enjoyed. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you got a lot of information out of it. I am doing my absolute best to be as useful, as informative as I can here, and try to be the best journalist that I know how to be. Everybody has bias. It's impossible not to have bias. And when I ride something really, really special and unique and luxurious and nice, yes, I have bias because it is good. And I have bias towards things that are very, very good. Is it expensive? Yes, absolutely. If you have questions, comments, anything I missed, put that down below in the comment sections. We'll have a discussion about it. If you like the work I'm doing here as an independent motorcycle journalist and content creator here at Big Rock Moto, please support the channel. There are ways to do that in the description and a pinned comment below. Thank you so much for watching. Please ride safe, and I'll see you out there.